$5 says she cries in 30 seconds, Sergeant Collins whispered, watching the new female soldier check her rifle. 10 says she freezes completely, Tank added with a smirk. They had no idea that in 2 hours, Private Martinez would be carrying their wounded bodies to safety through enemy gunfire. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Private Sarah Martinez had been with Bravo Company for 6 months, but she still felt like an outsider. Every morning during training she could hear the whispers. Every time she cleaned her rifle or checked her gear, she caught the sideways glances. The men in her unit had made up their minds about her before she even fired her first shot in anger. "I'm telling you, she won't last 5 minutes when the real shooting starts," said Sergeant Mike Collins, spitting tobacco juice into an empty water bottle. He was talking to Corporal James "Tank" Wilson, a big man with arms like tree trunks. They sat in the shade of their armored vehicle, watching Sarah practice field medicine on a training dummy. Tank nodded and crossed his arms. "Look at her. She gets teary-eyed watching sad movies. What's she gonna do when she sees real blood? Real bodies?" He shook his head. "Command made a mistake putting her with us. Combat ain't no place for someone so emotional." Private Danny Kim, barely 19 and trying to fit in with the older soldiers, laughed nervously. "My sister cries at dog commercials. Women are just built different, you know? More feelings and stuff." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the squad leader, walked over and heard the tail end of their conversation. He was a 20-year veteran with 3 combat tours under his belt. "You boys got nothing better to talk about?" he asked, but his tone suggested he wasn't really angry. "Just saying, Sarge," Collins continued, "when we get into our first real fight she's gonna break. I've seen it before. The crying, the freezing up, the panic. Then we'll have to babysit her instead of focusing on the mission." Rodriguez looked over at Sarah, who was now practicing loading magazines under time pressure. Her movements were quick and sure, her face focused. "She's passed every test so far," he said quietly. "Training ain't combat," Tank replied. "Wait until bullets start flying for real. Wait until she sees what an IED does to a guy. She'll fall apart, and then we'll all be in danger because we're trying to take care of her instead of fighting." What they didn't know was that Sarah could hear every word. She had grown up with 4 older brothers who never let her win at anything. She had fought her way through basic training when drill sergeants told her she was too small, too weak, too soft. She had endured months of comments about women not belonging in combat roles. But she never said anything back. She just worked harder. That evening, as the squad sat around cleaning weapons, the betting started. $5 says she cries in the first 30 seconds, Collins announced. 10 says she freezes up completely, added Tank. "I'll take that action," said Kim, trying to sound tough. 20 says she runs. Only Rodriguez stayed out of the betting. He watched Sarah methodically clean her M4 rifle, checking every part twice. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself at that age, a quiet determination that couldn't be taught. "Martinez," he called out. "You ready for tomorrow's patrol?" Sarah looked up from her weapon. "Yes, Staff Sergeant. Ready to do my job." The next morning came gray and cold. Intelligence reports suggested enemy activity in their sector, but that was nothing new. They had been running patrols for weeks without significant contact. The men seemed relaxed, joking and complaining about the early hour. Sarah double-checked her gear for the 3rd time. Medical supplies, extra ammunition, water, radio batteries. Everything in its place. She had studied the patrol route until she could navigate it in her sleep. She knew every building, every potential ambush site, every rally point. "You nervous, Martinez?" Tank asked as they loaded into the vehicles. "Just ready, Corporal," she replied. Collins snorted. "We'll see about that." The patrol started like dozens of others. 2 vehicles moving through the dusty streets of a small town, checking on local security, showing presence. The morning sun was getting hot, and the locals went about their business with the weary indifference of people who had lived through too much conflict. Sarah rode in the 2nd vehicle, watching the buildings through her window. Something felt different today, though she couldn't put her finger on what. The streets seemed too empty. Too quiet. "Contact front." Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio from the lead vehicle. The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 different buildings. Muzzle flashes sparked from windows and rooftops. Bullets whined off the armored vehicles and shattered glass. The driver of Sarah's vehicle yanked the wheel hard right, trying to get to cover. "Dismount! Dismount!" Tank shouted. Sarah's door flew open and she rolled out, her rifle ready. Training took over. "Find cover." Identify threats. Return fire. She could hear Collins shouting coordinates over the radio, his voice steady despite the chaos. A bullet cracked past her head, so close she felt the air displacement. Her heart hammered, but her hand stayed steady on her weapon. She spotted a muzzle flash from a second-story window and fired 3 controlled bursts. The enemy fire from that position stopped. Martinez. You good? Rodriguez called out. Good, Sarge, she called back, already moving to better cover behind a concrete wall. The firefight intensified. Enemy fighters seemed to be everywhere, firing from buildings, alleys, even from behind parked cars. The sound was overwhelming, the crack of incoming rounds, the boom of grenades, the steady chatter of automatic weapons. Collins had taken position behind their vehicle and was laying down suppressive fire with the squad's light machine gun. They got us pinned, he yelled. Can't advance. That's when the sniper opened up. The first shot took Kim in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind a low wall. The second shot went wide, but the third caught Tank in the leg as he tried to reach Kim. Sniper, sniper on the roof. Rodriguez shouted, but they couldn't see the shooter's position. Sarah watched Tank drag himself behind cover, blood streaming from his thigh. Kim was conscious but pale, clutching his shoulder. They needed medical attention, but the sniper had them locked down. Anyone who moved would be an easy target. The fourth shot found Sarah. The bullet hit her left side, just below her body armor. Fire raced through her ribs and she gasped, tasting copper. For a moment, the world grayed at the edges. She looked down and saw blood soaking through her uniform. Martinez is hit. Collins shouted. Sarah pressed her hand against the wound and felt warm blood flowing between her fingers. The pain was incredible, like someone had shoved a red-hot poker between her ribs. But she was still breathing. Still thinking, still fighting. How bad? Rodriguez called out. Sarah took a shaky breath and checked herself quickly. The bullet had gone through muscle and tissue but missed anything vital. She could still move, still shoot. I'm okay, Sarge. Still in the fight. She wasn't okay. Every breath sent lightning through her side and she was losing blood. But Kim and Tank were hurt worse and the sniper was still out there. The enemy fighters pressed their attack, trying to flank the squad's position. Sarah could see them moving between buildings, getting closer. With Kim and Tank wounded, they were down to 4 effective fighters against at least a dozen enemies. We need to move. Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. Can't stay pinned here. But every time someone tried to advance, the sniper's bullet would crack past them, forcing them back to cover. They were stuck and the enemy knew it. Sarah studied the buildings around them, looking for the sniper's nest. The shots were coming from elevation, probably a rooftop. She traced the angle of the last few shots and narrowed it down to 2 possible positions. A movement caught her eye, just a flash of cloth from behind a water tank on a flat roof 3 buildings away. There. She lined up her shot, controlled her breathing despite the pain in her side and waited. When the sniper moved again, she was ready. Her first shot missed, but it was close enough to make him flinch. Her second shot found its mark. The sniper's rifle clattered to the roof's edge and fell to the street below. Sniper's down, she called out, but there was no time to celebrate. The enemy fighters were still advancing, and Kim needed medical attention fast. His face was getting whiter by the minute. Collins Rodriguez maintained fire. Sarah shouted, surprising everyone including herself. I'm going for Kim. Negative. Rodriguez responded. You're wounded. Stay put. But Sarah was already moving. She low-crawled across 30 feet of open ground while bullets whined overhead. Collins and Rodriguez poured fire at the enemy positions, trying to keep their heads down. Every movement sent agony through Sarah's wounded side, but she kept going. She reached Kim and immediately started working. Pressure bandage on the shoulder wound. Check his pulse, weak but steady. His eyes were unfocused with shock. Hey Kim, she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. You're gonna be fine. Just a through and through. Clean wound. She was lying. The bullet had done serious damage to his shoulder and he was losing a lot of blood. But he needed to stay conscious, needed to keep fighting the shock. Can you move? She asked. Kim tried to sit up and nearly passed out. Don't think so. Sarah looked back at their position. Tank was still behind the wall, bleeding from his leg wound but still returning fire. The enemy was regrouping for another push. They had maybe 5 minutes before they would be overrun. She made a decision that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew her. I'm coming back for you, she told Kim. Stay awake. She crawled back through the gunfire, her own wound bleeding freely now. When she reached Rodriguez, he stared at her in amazement. "How the hell are you still moving?" he asked. "Adrenaline," she gasped. "Kim's bad. Tank's mobile but losing blood. We need to get them out of here." "Medevac's 20 minutes out," Rodriguez said grimly. "We don't have 20 minutes. Sarah looked at the tactical situation. The enemy had them surrounded on 3 sides. Their only escape route was back the way they had come, but that meant moving 2 wounded men across 200 meters of open ground while under fire. "Give me suppressive fire," she said. "I'm going to get them." "Martinez, you're not thinking straight," Collins called out. "You're bleeding all over the place. Let us handle this." Sarah met his eyes. There was no fear there, no tears, no panic. Just determination. "With respect, Sergeant, you're needed here. Keep them busy." What happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come. Sarah crawled back to Kim's position while Collins and Rodriguez unleashed everything they had at the enemy. The sound was deafening, their M4s on full auto, grenades exploding in windows, the heavy thump of the machine gun. She reached Kim and quickly assessed his condition. He was fading fast, going into shock from blood loss. She had to move him now or lose him entirely. "This is gonna hurt," she told him, then hauled him up in a fireman's carry. 120 pounds of soldier across her shoulders, her own wound screaming with every step, Sarah began the longest walk of her life. Bullets cracked around them as she staggered across the open ground. Twice she stumbled and nearly fell, but she kept going. Behind her, she could hear Collins cursing in amazement. "Jesus Christ, look at her go." She made it to the vehicles and loaded Kim into the back seat, applying fresh pressure bandages to his wounds. He was unconscious now but still breathing. "One down," she muttered, then turned back toward the gunfire. Tank was 75 meters away behind a different wall. The enemy had spotted Sarah's rescue and were concentrating fire on her route. It would be suicide to try the same approach twice. She studied the terrain looking for another way. There, a drainage ditch that ran along the side of the street. It would give her some cover, but she'd have to crawl the entire distance while dragging Tank back. "Cover me," she called out, then disappeared into the ditch. The next 10 minutes were a nightmare of mud, blood, and bullets. Sarah crawled through filthy water with her rifle balanced across her forearms, using her elbows to pull herself forward. Every movement sent fire through her wounded side, and she was leaving a trail of blood in the dirty water. She reached Tank's position just as he was running low on ammunition. His leg wound was worse than she had thought. The bullet had nicked his femoral artery and he was slowly bleeding to death. "Hey, tough guy," she said, applying a tourniquet to his thigh. "Time to go." Tank stared at her in disbelief. Blood streaked her face, her uniform was soaked with mud and gore, but her hands were rock steady as she worked on his wound. "You came back," he said stupidly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She finished the tourniquet and checked his pupils. Dilated but responsive. "Can you crawl?" "Yeah, I think so." The trip back was even worse. Tank was bigger and heavier than Kim, and the enemy had figured out where they were. Bullets splashed into the water around them as they inched through the drainage ditch. Sarah pushed Tank ahead of her, using her own body to shield him from the worst of the fire. Halfway back, a grenade exploded 20 feet away. The concussion knocked Sarah senseless for a few seconds, and she came to with dirt raining down on them and her ears ringing. Tank was unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. She grabbed him under the arms and kept moving. By the time they reached the vehicles, Sarah was running on pure willpower. She had lost so much blood that she was seeing spots, and her hands were shaking from shock. But she got Tank loaded into the vehicle and started working on his wounds. "How we doing, Martinez?" Rodriguez called out as he laid down covering fire. "2 for 2, Sarge," she called back, though her voice was getting weaker. Collins had been watching the entire rescue, his mouth hanging open. This was the woman he had bet would cry in her first firefight. The woman he thought would freeze up when things got tough. "Medevac inbound," Rodriguez announced. 2 minutes out. The sound of helicopter rotors filled the air, growing louder. The enemy fighters began to withdraw, not wanting to face the helicopter's guns. Within minutes, the shooting died down to scattered sniper fire. Sarah slumped against the vehicle, finally allowing herself to feel the pain. Her side felt like it was on fire and she was dizzy from blood loss. But Kim and Tank were alive. That's all that mattered. The medical helicopter landed in a whirlwind of dust and noise. Combat medics rushed out and immediately went to work on the wounded. Sarah tried to wave them off, insisting the other 2 were more serious, but she collapsed before she could finish the sentence. She woke up in a field hospital 6 hours later. Her side was bandaged, and 4 was pumping fluids into her arm, and she felt like she had been run over by a truck. But she was alive. "How are Kim and Tank?" were her first words. The nurse, a captain with kind eyes, smiled. "They're both going to make it. Thanks to you getting them medical attention so quickly. Kim's being airlifted to Germany tomorrow, but Tank should be back on duty in a few weeks." Sarah closed her eyes in relief. "What about the others? Rodriguez, Collins?" "Fine. Not a scratch on them. They're outside if you want to see them." A few minutes later, her squad mates filed into the medical tent. Sarah had never seen them look so uncomfortable. Rodriguez spoke first. "How you feeling, Martinez?" "Like I got shot," she replied with a weak smile. Collins stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. "Listen, Martinez. Sir, I owe you an apology. We all do." "For what?" "For being idiots," Tank said from the next bed over. His leg was elevated and wrapped in bandages, but he was grinning. "For thinking you couldn't handle combat. For thinking you were too emotional, too weak." Sarah looked around at their faces. These men who had doubted her, who had bet against her, who had assumed she would break under pressure. "I never asked you to believe in me," she said quietly. "I just asked you to let me do my job." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "You saved their lives today. Both of them. While wounded. Under fire. I've been in the army for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Collins ran his hand through his hair. "We thought being emotional made you weak. But watching you out there today, it wasn't weakness that made you risk your life for Kim and Tank. It was exactly the opposite." "I don't understand," Sarah said. "You care," Tank explained. "That's why you went back for us. Not because of duty or orders or training. Because you actually give a damn about your teammates. We mistook that caring for weakness, but it's actually what made you stronger than any of us." Danny Kim's voice was hoarse but clear from across the tent. "My mom always said the strongest people are the ones who feel everything deeply but keep going anyway. I never understood what she meant until today." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. "Not anymore. We're a team," she said simply. "That's what teams do. We take care of each other." Collins sat down heavily in a chair beside her bed. "I need to tell you something. Before the patrol we were betting on how you'd react in combat. Whether you'd cry or freeze or run." Sarah wasn't surprised. She had heard them. "And? We were all wrong. Dead wrong. You didn't cry until the shooting stopped. You didn't freeze, you moved when the rest of us were pinned down. You didn't run, you ran toward the danger to save us." He shook his head. "I've never been more wrong about anything in my life." Rodriguez pulled up another chair. "Command's recommending you for the Silver Star. Third highest decoration for valor. You earned it." "I was just doing my job," Sarah protested. "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "Your job was to provide covering fire and medical support. Your job wasn't to single-handedly rescue 2 wounded soldiers while taking enemy fire. Your job wasn't to crawl through a drainage ditch with a bullet in your ribs. You went way beyond the call of duty." Tank laughed, then winced as it pulled at his stitches. "You know what the funny thing is? We spent months worrying about how you'd handle combat. Turns out we should have been worried about how we'd handle watching you be braver than all of us combined." Word of the firefight spread quickly through the battalion. The story grew with each telling: how Private Martinez had been shot and kept fighting, how she had rescued 2 wounded soldiers under heavy fire, how she had proved that courage comes in all forms. A week later, Sarah was released from the hospital and returned to duty. Her wound was healing well, though it would leave a scar. She found that her reception in the unit had completely changed. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged her before now nodded respectfully when she passed. The betting about her performance had been replaced by genuine admiration. New female soldiers arriving at the unit were told, "You want to see how it's done? Watch Martinez." Tank had his own revelation. "You know what really gets me?" he said one evening as they cleaned their weapons. "We thought emotions made you weak. But emotions are what made you save us. If you didn't care about Kim and me, you would have stayed in cover like any sensible person would." Rodriguez, ever the professional soldier, saw it from a tactical perspective. "Emotional intelligence isn't separate from combat effectiveness," he explained to a group of new arrivals. "It's part of it." Martinez read the situation, assessed what her teammates needed, and acted decisively. That's not just courage, that's leadership. Sarah herself was still processing what had happened. She had never thought of herself as particularly brave. Growing up with 4 brothers had taught her to be tough, but she had always seen her emotional nature as something to overcome, not something to embrace. I used to think I had to choose, she told a female journalist who came to interview her about women in combat roles. I thought I had to be either strong or caring, either tough or emotional. But that day in the firefight I realized they're not opposites. They're the same thing. The journalist asked her what advice she would give to other women facing doubt about their ability to serve in combat roles. Don't try to be something you're not, Sarah replied. Don't try to be like the men, and don't let anyone tell you that caring about your teammates makes you weak. The reason I went back for Kim and Tank wasn't because I'm fearless. It's because I was terrified of losing them. Fear can paralyze you or it can motivate you to do extraordinary things. The choice is yours. 6 months later, Bravo Company faced another firefight. This time, everyone knew what Sarah was capable of, but she faced a different kind of pressure. The expectation to be a hero again. When the shooting started, Sarah found herself in a familiar position. Under fire, teammates in danger, split-second decisions to make. But this time she wasn't fighting alone. Collins was right beside her, laying down covering fire. Tank, back from medical leave, was coordinating their flanking maneuver. Kim, returned from Germany with a Purple Heart and limited duty status, was calling in artillery support. They worked as a team, each playing to their strengths, each trusting the others completely. When it was over and they were counting their blessings, no casualties this time, mission accomplished, Rodriguez gathered them together. Good work today, everyone. Martinez, solid leadership on that flanking move. Sarah looked around at her teammates, these men who had once bet against her, who now trusted her completely. It wasn't just me, Sarge. We all did good today. Collins grinned and spit tobacco juice into his ever-present bottle. Yeah, but you didn't cry. Everyone laughed, even Sarah. It had become a running joke in the unit, the bet they had all lost so spectacularly. Actually, Sarah said, wiping sweat from her forehead, I did cry a little when that RPG went over my head. Tears of joy, Tank added, because you knew you were about to kick some ass. As they cleaned their weapons that evening, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. She was still the same person. She still felt deeply, still cared intensely about her teammates, still got emotional during sad movies. But now those traits were seen as strengths, not weaknesses. A new soldier, Private Johnson, approached her nervously. Martinez? I heard about what you did last year. The rescue and everything. Sarah looked up from her rifle. Johnson was young, maybe 19, with the eager but uncertain expression of someone trying to prove himself. What about it? Well, I was wondering, how do you deal with being scared? I mean, everyone talks about how brave you are, but do you get scared? Sarah smiled. It was a good question, an honest question. Every day, she said. Every single day. Fear isn't the opposite of courage, Johnson. Courage is being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. But what if I freeze up? What if I let everyone down? Sarah set down her cleaning rod and looked at the young soldier seriously. You know what I learned? We're all afraid of different things. Collins is afraid of letting his daughter down. Tank's afraid of not being strong enough to protect his buddies. Rodriguez is afraid of losing soldiers under his command. I'm afraid of not caring enough or caring too much. What do you mean? I mean, fear is information. It tells you what matters to you. The trick is not letting that fear control you, but letting it motivate you to be better. She picked up her rifle again. And if you do freeze up, that's okay too. We've all got your back. That's what teams are for. Johnson nodded slowly. Thanks, Martinez. I'm glad you're here. As he walked away, Sarah felt a warm sense of belonging that she had never experienced before joining this unit. She was no longer the outsider trying to prove herself. She was an integral part of a team that respected her not despite her emotional nature, but because of it. 5 years after that first firefight, Sarah Martinez was Staff Sergeant Martinez, leading her own squad. She had been decorated multiple times, not just for that day when she saved Kim and Tank, but for consistent excellence in leadership and combat performance. The men who had once bet against her were still in her life. Collins had retired and was coaching his daughter's soccer team, telling anyone who would listen about the bravest soldier he had ever served with. Tank had become a drill instructor, and he made sure every new female recruit heard the story of Sarah's rescue mission. Rodriguez was now a master sergeant, and he frequently used Sarah's example when teaching leadership courses. Kim had left the army and become a paramedic, inspired by the way Sarah had saved his life. He kept in touch with all of them, sending pictures of his wedding, his new job, his growing family. Sarah herself had found something she never expected when she first enlisted. A place where her emotions, her caring nature, and her determination were not just accepted but valued. She had learned that strength comes in many forms, and that the best leaders are often those who feel most deeply. When new soldiers joined her unit, she made sure they understood one thing from the very beginning. Every member of the team was valuable, regardless of gender, background, or personality type. The only thing that mattered was their commitment to the mission and to each other. And if anyone ever suggested that emotions made a soldier weak, she would smile and tell them a story about a firefight that changed everything she thought she knew about courage, strength, and what it really means to be a warrior. The betting had stopped long ago. Everyone knew now that when bullets started flying, Sarah Martinez was exactly the person you wanted by your side, not despite her emotions but because of them. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is care so much about your teammates that you're willing to risk everything to bring them home safe. And she never did cry during a firefight. Not until it was over, anyway. But when she did cry, for the wounded, for the lost, for the weight of responsibility and the price of courage, her teammates understood that those tears were not a sign of weakness. They were a sign of strength.